We lost. Snitching up there. All right, we got to bring in two Fox NBA analysts, Chris Broussard and Slick Rick the Bucher. Slick Rick, going to you first. Do you have an issue with Paul George up there wet snitching and blaming Doc Rivers?
I don't have an issue with that. I don't have an issue with you wearing your Clippers gear today, knowing that we were going to have this subject at all either. But no, I have no problem with what he said or that he said it. The truth is that for any of us observing, or at least I had the very questions, and what he said only confirmed my suspicions. I could not figure out why they weren't making any adjustments, why they were continuing to play Lou Williams in the role that he did despite his disappointing performances, why they continued to play Landry Shamet in the way that he ultimately did. This looked like a team that was not being guided in the right way, that desperately needed some leadership and was not getting it. So it doesn't surprise me. And by the way, I have a problem with, we're always asking these guys to be open and honest and to tell us what's really going on. Paul George did exactly that. Now, the one thing that he did not do and that he needed to start with was,
here we go.
Look, I played bad myself, so I got to take some of it on me. And then go on and you can talk about all of the other stuff. The fact that there was no mea culpa, I feel there needed to be, considering the way he played. But the fact that he talked about something that I thought was apparent, I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Wow. It's amazing. I'm going to have to sit up here and be the one that breaks it down and be objective about it. Look, everybody knows I'm a Clipper homer, but I'm also not a liar. So I did have a problem with this in some degree. It's interesting. The tone of it made me say, okay, I shouldn't have a problem with it, because he said everything so matter of fact. He didn't pour any hot sauce on it. He didn't come out too spicy. What he said sounded like a State of the Union, like this is what happened. It's just the time. Yeah, but the timing is bad because it's retro, it's post. Like after we're like, we really want to hear all the things that occurred that you didn't do anything about in those moments, but still allowed to play out. And now it sounds like you have some gripes. That started me feeling a little unsettled about what he was saying. But then I started to realize what was really going on. That Paul George knew that he can win this in the court of public opinion because, one, we're talking about Doc Rivers. This is the same Doc Rivers who was the coach of Lob City, Los Angeles Clippers. And we know that when they failed and lost in the playoffs up 3-1 to the Houston Rockets years ago, that Doc Rivers was the coach and chemistry issues were to blame. So if you just go there again, it won't be looked at as just a coincidence. People are going to start to look at Doc Rivers as the common denominator. So I understand that part. But then you start looking at this situation of, oh, y'all didn't practice all year? Really? So you skipped one of the necessary evils? I know that Kawhi Leonard is the ultimate load management player, and supposedly Doc Rivers is the ultimate load management coach. And this was a marriage made in hell because both of those guys didn't want to necessarily practice. But Paul George, like, you're a veteran. You're Paul George. You came in on the buddy pass with Kawhi. That means all the privileges given to Kawhi was given to you. Why didn't you sit there and say, we need to go through the necessary evils of practicing or making adjustments? That's my biggest issue. That's being a player and a veteran pro player like Paul George. You're talking about an all-star who doesn't want to sit there and say, stop, let's make sure we handle our business. That, to me, rubbed me the wrong way.
Look, I don't have a problem with him calling out Doc Rivers, because the fact is, Doc deserves some criticism. Doc deserves some blame. You know, not just for this past series. Obviously, he didn't make the adjustments. As Rick said, you could kind of see that they're doing the same thing, that they're playing the wrong guys at the wrong times. You could see that in that series, and Paul just confirmed that. And then Doc, Doc just didn't do a great job in L.A. altogether. You mentioned it, Marcellus. 7 years there. 2 times, or never got past the second round, even though he had championship caliber talent, both with the Chris Paul, Blake Griffin regime and this past year with Kawhi and Paul George. And the culture that they allowed, now that's an organizational problem, But Doc is a big part of that. At some point, he needed to step in and change things, especially when he saw it going off the rails. However, Paul George still takes an L because some of the things we didn't see in that clip, he was flat out wrong. You can't come out and criticize Doc Rivers with stuff that's wrong. He said they played me like I was Ray Allen or J.J. Redick. I didn't get enough pick and rolls. I didn't get enough post-ups. It was all pin downs and running off screens. Wait a minute. The statistics show, Paul, you have more pick and roll opportunities than any other season in your career. Mm-hmm. The statistics show you had as many post-ups as you had a year ago in Oklahoma City. The statistics show you have fewer catch and shoots than you did in Oklahoma City. So if you're going to go at Doc Rivers or anybody publicly like that, you got to be right. That's the problem I had with Paul George. When you're wrong, it looks like you're trying to scapegoat. And then it makes it worse when you don't give the mea culpa, Rick. The fact that he was wrong about the criticism and then never owned up to it and said, I didn't deliver, I didn't get it done, that really makes it look bad. And it turns out to be another L for Paul George.
Well, Chris, I'd have to look at the specifics of the statistics in those last 3 games against the Nuggets in terms of how he was used. Because I believe, if he wasn't, he should have been talking about that and the lack of adjustments, because that's really where it went south. Marcellus, you're cracking me up just because you're going, you know what? Paul George pointed out that Doc Rivers was the common denominator in all the disappointments by the Clippers. He didn't make that up. That's the reality. There is one common denominator, and that's freaking Doc Rivers in terms of giving up 3-1 leads in series. So I don't think he's out of turn in saying that. But here's the other part, and this is really the specifics of the bubble, because I haven't forgotten, and I hope you guys haven't. Prior to the bubble, for all of the things that we might have been wondering about the Clippers, we were all still convinced they were moving in the right direction, and they had what was necessary to win a championship. That was based on what they were doing. It wasn't until we got to the bubble where, if you look at the teams that succeeded, chemistry, team chemistry, was the most important factor. You look at the teams that were ultimately in the conference finals: Denver, Lakers, Boston, Miami. What did they all have in common? They all had the best team chemistry. Were they all the most talented teams? You could make a very strong argument that they were not. Now, the team chemistry, it was the one thing that the Clippers were still working on and had no chance to improve on. And oh, by the way, you come back and your 2 super subs, Montrezl Harrell and Lou Williams, are nowhere near what they had been previously. But the problem is, all of that took place, and I never saw Doc try to address it in the bubble at the time. They needed that to happen. So ultimately, I'm still of the mind that the Clippers were on the path to winning a championship if we don't have the shutdown. But we did. There's an adjustment that needed to be made, and it was not made. And who else is supposed to make that other than your head coach?
I just don't want to be misquoted or misstated, Slick Rick, taking shots at my shots, because it's interesting that I think what Paul George did was looked around and didn't want to look fully in the mirror, at least at the time when he did this podcast, all up in smoke. And so he's there, and he's not trying to go all the way with his argument. So now he's going to pick the low-hanging fruit, which is the common denominator between Clipper collapses of a few years ago and Clipper collapses right now. Oh, I could put some of this on Doc Rivers without even intentionally or directly saying it, and you guys are going to run with it. Here's my example. I had an uncle growing up. I was really young, so don't ask me for all the details. But I know he went to jail for theft. Maybe even armed robbery, something crazy. But he was nice to me, so I didn't even trip on it. But he comes home, and I remember we were just chilling one time, and my grandma screams out, where's my money in my purse? And then immediately, and it's dozens of people in the room, goes to my uncle who just got home from jail from stealing. Turns out my uncle didn't do it, but he already had that on his record, so it was easy for everybody to kind of believe her in that moment for going there. That's what Paul George did. And you want to know why I know Paul George did that? I'm so plugged in with the Clippers. Right now, Paul George is at the podium doing his Clippers introductory press conference for this season. And guess what he said? Quote, I respect Doc Rivers. We were hella motivated. But, quote, I'm the one that blew the 3-1 lead. Paul George says, I'm the one that blew the 3-1 lead. Yeah, he realized and had to backpedal already that too much of this was going towards Doc Rivers and the old regime versus the players. Being a player, I understand that there's times you got to protect us from ourselves because we'll look around and see our talent level and just say, we got this on paper, when really somebody, whether it's a coach or a leader on that team, needs to sit around and says, we need to do something to evoke change. That didn't happen with the leadership with the Clippers last year. Hopefully it happens this year.